In this video, I will be creating an Unreal Engine 5 project to visualize our flight simulators. As part of the Simulation of Flight class, you'll gain access to this tutorial document walking you through this process step by step. This video, I will be going through this process in real time, so I won't be following this step by step to a T, but you'll be able to see my process in real time. This video isn't meant to be an exhaustive overview of what Unreal can do, rather just to get you started and familiar with how to set up a project and get a basic visualization project working. The first thing to get started, you need to install Unreal Engine. You can go to this link and download the Epic Games Launcher, and it'll have you create an account. And then once you open that up, you'll see this screen, and then you should see this Unreal Engine tab here. And then you're going to want to install an engine version. You can see I have a couple of versions here. Just hit this plus and then select what version you want to install. For this tutorial, I'm doing 5.6.1. So try to install that one or the most recent version. And then we'll also need a plugin. So come to Fab here. This is pretty much like the Unreal Engine store. So you can, there's a bunch of aircraft on here. There's a vendor called Vigilante that provides a lot of free assets. So we won't be going over integrating these aircraft today. I wouldn't start with one of these, but I show you this just to so you're aware that these are an option. These will come with animations and textures, so you can move the control surfaces and retract the landing gear, things like that. We'll look at vehicle design a little later, but what we want to add is a plugin called Cesium. This is what we're going to be using for our terrain. And see, I already have it added. So you're going to want to add Cesium for Unreal. Once you do that, it should be listed down here in your plugins, and then you can choose to install it to a specific engine version. So install it to the most recent version that you're going to want to use. You can see 5.6 isn't listed for me because I already have it installed. And then you can verify that you installed it correctly. Cesium will be listed here. So go ahead and start installing your engine and Cesium. And the other thing you need to download is Visual Studio if you're on Windows. Today I'm going to be working through it on a Windows machine. The process is pretty similar on a Mac. I believe the only real difference is Mac users will use Xcode instead of Visual Studio, but we'll be working through Windows today. Download Visual Studio, try to get the 2022 version. Sometimes the versions can cause issues. And once you have that installed, or if you already have it installed, open up the installer, and we're going to modify it. And we want to make sure that we have the correct assets added. Not all of these are what you need for what we're doing in Unreal, but for the sake of debugging, try to match what I have here. So I have these two added, these two, this game development, this Linux, and then there's a bunch of individual components. I'm just going to scroll through this, and you can pause the video and make sure you're matching up. So there's some .NET assets, some C++, and then there's some Unreal ones, so really make sure you have these. And then there'll be Windows STK. Make sure you have these added. And then if you made changes, you'll install those, and it'll update Visual Studio. So once Unreal Engine is installed, we can launch it by just hitting this launch button. Once it opens, you'll see this screen. Keep in mind that Unreal Engine is a video game development software. So there's a bunch of different frameworks here you can mess around with. We're just going to start with a blank project here. Select C++, desktop, maximum, and I'm just going to call this Flight Sim UE5. Create. Now sometimes when you create this project, it'll throw an error that it's tried to rebuild. We'll see if it does it for me here in a second. If you don't get the error when you create your project will open automatically, as well as the Visual Studio project. If you did get the error, I'll show you what to do. So the error will say something like it couldn't compile the code. So you'll want to come to your project. Let's just overview the structure of this. So this is your Unreal Engine project. This is the project inside of Visual Studio. So Unreal Engine uses Visual Studio or Xcode to compile the project when you change the source code. The main source code is in here. If you create classes or whatnot, more than likely they'll be in here. And then most of our content we're going to create is in the content folder. There's nothing in here yet, but this is where most of our assets will reside. So anytime we change the source code, we have to rebuild inside of Visual Studio. But if you have issues or you change the structure of something in your code, delete this, right click here, and then generate Visual Studio project files. This will take a second. And then we'll open up our project in Visual Studio. Make sure you're in development, Win64, and your project name is shown here. On this right side, if you had assets, you'd be able to open up and open up the classes or whatnot. All we need to do in here is for our project to right click and hit rebuild. And this will go through and rebuild all of our source code. We don't have to mess with build files or anything like that. So it'll step through each of the assets that it needs to rebuild. So you can see it has 7 that it detected and it's rebuilding. So I'll let this rebuild and we'll come back. Okay, it just finished rebuilding. Sometimes it'll change the screen, so you can just go back to the build tab. See, it only took me 30 seconds. This will greatly depend on your machine. 12 succeeded, no failed, no skipped. This is what you want to see. And the more assets you have in here, it'll take this a lot longer to rebuild. This was one of the main reasons why for the Simulation of Flight class we separated the physics from Unreal, because every time you would make a change to your physics, you'd have to come in and rebuild this, and it was really annoying. So once this rebuilds and succeeds, you can close out of that, and then we'll open up our project. You can either open it up by double-clicking this or coming back to the Epic Games launcher, and your project should be here now. So we'll open up our project. The first time you open it, it may take a while. It needs to compile shaders, but it should be pretty fast, the subsequent opens. When this opens up, it just has this default map here. You can see nothing's here. Let's go over the menu here just to get you oriented. This left window over here, you can place things. So if you're making a level yourself, you could come in and like add shapes to the level. We're not going to need to do any of that. Up here are some tabs. If what I go over, you can't see some of the windows, look in here. So I have details, outliner, one, place actors, world settings, and then normal stuff in file. Here's some level things we'll look at here in a second. You can open up the project settings. We'll mess with this a little later. Bunch of different settings you can configure. Manage plugins and some other tools. If you wanted to create a C++ class, you would add it this way so that the Visual Studio project would update the build file and whatnot appropriately. This is the blueprint menu. We'll spend some time in this menu. When you want to play, you hit this play button, and then your game will play. You can hit escape or that red square to exit. When you package your project to an executable, this is what this is for, this platforms. Over to the right is this outliner here. And when you have a level, it'll show all the assets inside the level. And when you click on one, it'll open up this details tab where you can modify the details. We'll look at this a little later. For actually navigating in the level, you'll see this coordinate system down here. Left click, you can kind of walk around-ish. Right click is moving the camera. If you hold the middle mouse button down, you can get some finer movement. There's a bunch of different tools up here. This will change the kind of grid size. We'll look at this here in a minute. The main thing to note is this camera speed. If you increase this, then you'll move around a lot quicker. If you hold right click and control WASD, you can fly around. So if you change this camera speed, if I lower it all the way down, you can see you can barely tell I'm moving. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of the editor. Let's jump into creating our level. So first thing we want to do is come up to File, New Level, and we'll just start with an empty one. I don't want to save that one. Okay, we just have a blank level here. I'm just going to save this. I'll call it default level. Create a new folder just called levels. Save it in here. One thing to note, if you hit Control Space at the same time, it'll open up this content browser, and it'll open up this content folder that we saw previously, and you'll have convenient access to the assets that we create. Okay, so we have our level. Let's add in our terrain. So let's come to plugins, and we are going to search for Cesium that we installed with the Epic Games Launcher. Enable, and then it'll close and restart. Okay, you'll probably get this error message here about a collision profile. You can just ignore this for now. We'll fix this later if it becomes a problem. Most of the time it just causes an issue when we're trying to package the executable, but you can just ignore that for now. Close out of the plugins window. And now you should see the Cesium tab here. If you don't, you can come to Window and add Cesium there. The first time you enable Cesium in your project, it'll have you link to your account. This will open up the browser, and you'll want to create an account. Try to use the account information you used for the Epic Games launcher for your Epic Games account. Sometimes they'll link, so you don't have to make a whole new account, but walk through the process of creating an account, and then when you go through the whole process, your project will automatically update and give you access to Cesium. Okay. Right, this is the default one. So we want to open up our level. So open level, double click. And let's do this really quick. Go to edit, project settings, maps and modes. And we're going to set that when we open up the editor, it'll open up the map we created instead of this blank open world. Same thing with this one. This is when you package your game, what level it's going to open up first. This is going to differ if you want like the game to open to a main menu or something like that. Add those. And then for project settings, make sure you close this. It'll save when it closes. Otherwise the changes won't be applied. So now when we open up this editor, it should open up our default level for us. Okay, so we have this blank level. Let's add in our Cesium assets. So you shouldn't have anything in your level to start out. We want to add these photorealistic tiles. Hit this plus, and then it'll ask about a token. If this is your first time, create a new one. I'm just going to use an existing one. And you can't tell that much happened because it's all dark. So let's add this sun sky. And now we have a sun, and you can see that we have our nice terrain. So you should only have these Cesium assets here in this level so far. And then the sun sky and the tiles should be a component of this georeference here. You can see if I collapse this, you can see these are a part of this. So Cesium is open world. So if I increase the camera speed even more than that, and I fly up, it's actually a spherical Earth. So you can go anywhere you want, and it has the Google tiles pulled in. And depending on what kind of terrain you want, you can mess with these different tiles over here, depending on what you want your map to look like. But we'll just use the photorealistic tiles, and this will actually load in. It'll be easier to see later, but it even loads in trees, and if you're in a city, it'll actually load in the 3D buildings, which is pretty cool. For our project, we're going to set this up to spawn in Cache Valley and Logan. So if you click the georeference and come to the details, you'll have these coordinates where you can put in anywhere you want. In the tutorial document, I have the information for Logan in there, so you can copy and paste it. There we go. And we're going to set the height to 0 so that this matches with the convention inside our flight simulators. Okay, so if I come to this this origin here, you can see now we're in Cache Valley here, and you can, if I get closer, I'm still a little fast on my camera speed. Let's turn that down. And it actually loads in the 3D buildings. Okay, so we have our terrain set up. Let's go to this sun sky. And there's a lot of things you can do with this. You can change the colors, but what we're going to do is set up this sun for any date that we want. So I'm just going to set just a random date. You can see it's going to update the sun's position in the sky for that date and time. Feel free to look through this. There's a lot of assets here. You can change the color of the sky and whatnot, but this is fine for what we need. Okay, we pretty much have our terrain set up. Now we need to add UDP communication. So you'll be getting another UDP module, but this isn't just a class or a module. This is an actual plugin for Unreal, a custom plugin. So We add this slightly different than how we added Cesium. You'll get this from the book website or wherever Dr. Hunsaker has it for you. What we want to do is come into our project file and create a new folder called plugins, and Unreal Engine will recognize this folder and that there's a plugin in here. Let's close out of save and close out of the editor, and then we need to, since we added a new source file, we're going to open up Visual Studio and rebuild. And while we're here, while it's rebuilding, we'll take a look at how this UDP class works. Okay, so I'm going to pull up this definitions header file. This UDP class is very simple, just to make this whole process easy. How it's set up is there's a class for sending and receiving, and they both have their own send and receive struct. So this is the send struct, which is just controls, and then the receive is what it'll get from our physics, which is just the state information, some controls if your physics is handling the pilot controls, and then some geographic coordinates. This is for if you want to customize Cesium or whatnot. We're just going to ignore these. But then we have the states of the aircraft. So make sure that your flight simulator is set up to send in this format. If you want to change these, you can. Just follow this same format. So if you wanted to add more variables, you would append on and change the variable, and then make sure you add on here as well. And when you make a change, make sure you rebuild every time. The way this is set up is there's anytime you send, it's going to use this struct. Anytime you receive, it's going to expect this struct. If you're trying to set up multiple receive or multiple send connections, you'll have to modify the class a little bit. It should be pretty straightforward, but for what we're doing for the class, this should be more than adequate. So you shouldn't need to touch this unless you want to customize it. But let's look at our build. So I see it took a little longer, and this time we had a couple more assets. We had 14 instead of 7 the first time. So make sure everything succeeded. And close out of that, and then open up our project again. Okay, we're back in our editor, and we have added the class to our source files, but the way Unreal Engine works is you create blueprints, which you can kind of think of it as like creating a new instance of the class. So we're going to come to this blueprint editor, create a new empty blueprint, and there's some default ones. We'll mess with this a little later when we create our vehicle, but come down to all classes. We're going to search for UDP, and you can see here's our two classes, a receiver and a sender. So we'll set up a receiver, save this in blueprints, and I'm going to call it BP UDP receiver. It's convention inside of Unreal to put BP as in blueprint for a blueprint, just to make it a little more obvious. We'll save that, and it'll pull up our blueprint here. And for what we're using this for, we don't need to do anything inside of here, so you can close out of that. But we still need to add it in our level. You can see it's not added here. So open up the content browser, control space, go to blueprints, and just drag this in. It doesn't matter where this is located. You can see it's now added to our project over here. And now we're going to actually add the logic. So every level itself has its own blueprint. So come up here and open level blueprint. And so this is called the events graph, and these red blocks are called events. So begin is it'll call this once. Tick is it'll call whatever functionality is here every time tick through the sim or through the graphics that when you have it running. What we want to do is add the logic to set up our UDP connection and then read the port. So we need to add a reference. So come back to this screen, click on receiver, go straight back, right click, and select create a reference to that. And this is basically creating a variable of that class type. In here, if you right click, it'll open up the search bar and you can search for whatever blocks you need. So like a multiply, an add, you'll see we'll add quite a few here in a minute. If you drag off of this node here, it'll open up the same search bar, but it'll be context sensitive. So it'll only show you options that make sense for this connection. For example, if we search just UDP, it'll open up the functions that we have inside of our UDP communication class. So we'll start with starting the connection, and then we'll connect the flow here. We'll name this. This is just kind of for debugging and visualization purposes. If you need to, that's not that important. I'm going to create the port on 9000. This isn't great to hard code this here. The correct way to do this would be creating a menu or an input file of some sort where the user could change this easily. But for what we're doing, we're just going to hard code it. So this will start the connection. If you want to debug, it'll return this Boolean and you can print it out. So if we wanted to debug, we could search for a branch, which is basically an if statement. So if it returns true, that means it's set up correctly. So we'll just print, let's just say UDP receive succeeded. And then maybe we'll put one for fail, UDP receive fail. Okay, so when this starts, it's going to create the port and then print to the screen these print statements. Notice it says development only, so these will only print inside this editor. When you package the project, these won't print to the screen. There's another way you have to do that. It's a little more complicated. There's a couple more options here, the color, how long it's on the screen. Feel free to mess with that. Now what we want to do is we want to update our connection. What I'm going to do, just for convenience, I'm actually going to make this a variable, so promote to variable. And what this is now is this is a local variable inside of this blueprint. Just for easy reference, I'm going to rename this and just say it's my UDP receiver, and then I can drag this in and get it. And same as before, we're going to search up our functions. We're going to do is new data ready. So this will return a Boolean if it detects that there's new data to pull. And we're going to make a branch. And if there is data ready, what we want to do is then get the data. So true, get the data. And this return value is going to return the struct type that we defined in the header file. And if I drag off here, I can search for break. It's going to break that struct up into the individual floats here to access. We're going to pause here. We're not going to do anything with what we receive yet. We'll wait until we create our vehicle, and then we'll pass this into our vehicle blueprint. So in our level, we'll set up the connection, and then every time through we're going to check if there's new data, and if there is, we're going to pull it in and then eventually pass it to our vehicle. For blueprints, make sure you save. This asterisk means it needs to be saved. and then make sure you compile. So if there's changes that need to be compiled, this will be yellow. Click this and it's green. If there's failures or warnings in here, this will go red. Okay, let's work on creating our vehicle. As I showed in the Epic Games launcher, you can get some pretty advanced vehicles. What we're going to do here is just put in a static model. So we're just going to get an STL from Thingiverse. It's just this simple F-16 model. Download this, and what we need to do is we need to convert it to a GLB file type. There's a number of different softwares you can use. I'm going to use Paint 3D. Open up the model that you downloaded. Whoops. And all we need to do is just resave it. So the 3D model has a GLB. And I'm going to just call this F-16. And I'm not going to put it in my project yet. I'm just going to save it somewhere that's easy to find. Just going to save it there. We can exit out of here. We'll come back to our project and open up the content browser, control space, and we need to add it to our project. So what I'm going to do is in this content folder, I'm going to make a new folder called models, just in case we want to add multiple aircraft. It's a little easier to organize. We're going to find our model and just drag and drop it in. More likely than not, it'll open up this window. We'll just hit import. And now we have our vehicle in here. You can see it created a material for it and some textures, but the main thing we wanted was this static mesh. This is the actual vehicle. All right, now we can actually create our vehicle blueprint. So come up here like we did before, new empty blueprint. Instead of a custom class, we're going to select Pawn. And remember, this is a video game engine, so what Pawn does, it allows the user to possess an item and control it. So we're going to hit Pawn, and we'll just call this F-16, save it in the Blueprints folder. And now we have a blueprint here. Open up the content browser, navigate to the model, drag and drop it in, and there's our model. You can fly around and look at it. So there's a couple of modifications we need to make. Obviously it's not oriented correctly. You can see there's this coordinate system down here. We're going to align it with the typical traditional aircraft coordinate system with X going out the nose and Y out the right wing. I'm going to make Z going up. That's just for convenience with the level. You can orient this however you want. You'll just have to compensate later for it. But if you want to follow along, what I'm going to do is rotate this 90 and this by -90. And then, so it's oriented how I want. Now we need to scale it properly. This is much smaller than a real F-16. There's not a great measuring tool inside of this blueprint, but what we can do, let's compile and save this. Come back to our level, open up content browser, and then we have this new blueprint class. We can drag it into our level. Let's try to fly to it. Here's our F-16. You can see it also added this asset over here in our level. What we want to do is hide the Cesium stuff, come up to perspective and hit top under orthographic views, and then find our vehicle, zoom in, zoom in. This thing's in the way, so let's just move it like that. Okay, so now we have the vehicle here, and what we can do is hold the middle mouse button, and we can measure the tiles. Let's change that to 1, so we have a little better fidelity here. So Unreal by default uses centimeters as its unit. So for the F-16, we want it to be around 9.1 meters. So that's not right. I found that 27, and 29 get me pretty close. Let's double check. Pretty close there. And we want 14.8. That's pretty close there. You can get this a lot closer if you're so inclined. That's good for me. Let's return to our perspective view and turn on Cesium. Okay. So our aircraft is scaled. It's oriented properly. Now we need to adjust the location. So you can tell in this level, if I come up to the aircraft, oh, there it is. You can see why that threw me off, because the coordinate system is all the way up here. We want this around where the CG is of the aircraft. So if we didn't change this, when we tried to rotate this, it would rotate around this origin, which is not what we want. There's not an easy built-in way to just move this there. What we need to do is come up to this add, search for scene, and then make sure it's a component of this. Whoops, don't want to do that. Component of this default scene, and then make the F-16 model a part of that scene. And what this does is now we have this origin, and we can move this aircraft around without moving our overall origin here. So you'll see the difference here in a second. So if I move this, if I didn't add the scene, you can see if I try to move this around, all it does is move the origin up here, because this origin is connected to the 3D model. But now with this scene, the scene origin is here. So we come back to the level, and now our origin is at the CG here, which is what we want. Let's take a brief look at meshes. So we'll come into our F-16 and open up the content browser, and I'm going to come to the materials folder for the model we downloaded. Right click, and I'm going to create a new material. I'm just going to call this test material. Double click, it'll open up, and we're just going to make this really simple and just change the color. So we'll search for, what's it called? Constant 3 vector. You can convert this to a parameter, connect this to base color, and then double clicking on this, you can just easily change the color here. You can see here in this viewer, you can see what the material looks like. Save that. And then how we apply it is make sure you're clicked on the actual model. You can see the static mesh that it's using, then also the material. If I come down to test material, it applied that material, and now our aircraft is blue, at least in my case. You can get really fancy with this. There's it's kind of a rabbit hole for materials and textures to make things look really nice, but you can see it's pretty simple to just change a color this way. Okay, last thing we need to do in here to set up our vehicle is to add a camera. So come up to add. We're going to add first a spring arm. I'll explain why in a second. And a camera, if I can spell it. camera, and you can see there's a number of different options here. We'll just make a simple camera. Make sure the camera is a component of the spring arm, and then make sure all of this is a component of the F-16. I'll show why in a second. When you click on camera, you'll have both of these. You'll have the spring arm that the camera is attached to, and you can get in detail with this. What the spring arm is basically a spring arm that's attached to wherever you put it, and you can enable lag and whatnot so that the camera isn't rigidly mounted to the vehicle. If you want it to like lag, or so that you can better see like turbulence or the dynamics of the aircraft, you can mess with that. We're just going to have it static for now. If we click on camera, we can move this camera around, maybe tilt it down a little bit, and then we can see what this looks like. If we compile, come back here and select our model, and it'll show our camera view. So maybe we need to come a little closer, maybe a little higher up, come back here, maybe a little closer, and that's good enough for now. You can see it's showing the camera here now. And the reason why we made this a component of our mesh is so if we needed to come in here and change where this is located or how it's rotated, you can see the camera actually moves with the vehicle. Okay, that pretty much wraps up setting up the vehicle. Now we need to add in the logic of updating its state. But first, actually, we need to tell Unreal to possess this camera. If we just start our level here, you can see it just adds this vehicle in it. We're not telling it that we actually want it to be the thing the player is controlling. So let's exit out of this. We'll go back to our level blueprint that we added the UDP, and we're going to add some possession nodes. So first we're going to right click and search for get player controller, drag off of this and search for possess, and then we're going to squeeze it in with the rest of our begin nodes. Put this here. I believe that's all we need to do. Oh, nope. So this is getting the player controller, and then we're telling it to possess something, but we haven't told it what to possess to. So same thing how we did with the receiver class or the blueprint. Come to this F-16, go back, right click, and create a reference to F-16. Now we can connect that. And while we're at it, I'm just going to make this a variable too, just for convenience. Put that there. So now when we start this, when it begins, we're telling it to possess this blueprint, and it's going to default to the camera view that we have already made. And just like that. So we can't move around because we haven't added any controls or anything yet. Now let's work on updating the state of the aircraft. So we'll come back to the blueprint for the F-16, and over to the left side we have some variables here. We're going to create some of our own, change the type to a vector, and we're going to save the position Euler, and then I'm also going to add this init Euler. I'll explain why here in a little bit. This is to compensate for the original orientation that I wanted, but you can ignore that for now, just follow along. So with these variables, if we compile, we can set what the default values are here. Most of the time this doesn't matter because you overwrite these anyways, but we're going to set these to some default values. We're going to set when we start the sim, even when it hasn't received UDP states yet, we'll have this spawn at a certain location. We'll have 0, 0, and then I'm going to put 140,208 for the altitude. This is around so this is in centimeters, but this is the elevation for Cache Valley. So we'll look at that in a second, but you can just put in the altitude that you want it to start at, compensating for elevation. If we set this at 0 and we started at the aircraft would just spawn at sea level underneath our terrain, which we don't want. Oiler, we can set 0, 0, 0. In an oiler, I'm going to set this to, I believe, -90. And let's take a look at Y. So you can see this just defaulted to point the aircraft this way. I want it to start with the nose going north. So I'm going to change the location to 0, 0 and then put in that same value, 140,208, which is around the elevation for Logan, as I said, but in centimeters. Whoop. Too much. So when we start this, the aircraft will start here. We want it to go north. And setting this isn't really that important. We're actually setting these inside of our blueprint that we'll use, but just to illustrate how I got these values, this is where I want my aircraft to start at. So if I start this, this is where it'll start when it's waiting for the UDP states. Okay, let's come back here. We have these 3 variables set up, and what we're going to do next is create a custom function called update states. And what we'll do with this is do any conversions or formatting we need to before actually updating the state of the vehicle. So changing signs, units, we'll handle that here just to keep it organized. You can add inputs or outputs for this function. We're only going to need inputs, and I'm going to have our position and our quaternion for the orientation. Actually, I'm going to do this convention. Oops. And see, as I'm adding those, it's adding these inputs here. Okay, so what we're trying to do is just update the location and the orientation of our vehicle. If you had a HUD or some other advanced things where you'd use more of the state of the aircraft, you can modify this, but we just want the airplane to fly around and change its orientation according to our sim. So this is all we need to do. And now I'm going to add the logic here for the block diagram of converting this to what Unreal expects. So I'm going to add some multiply statements here, and to go from feet to centimeters, it's 30.48. Now, just because of the way I've set up my orientation coordinate system in the blueprints, a couple of these will need to be switched and the sign flipped. If this confuses you of why I'm doing this, you can play around with this and you'll see, depending on how you've set up your coordinate system, your plane might fly sideways or be in the wrong orientation. So just the way I've defined my coordinate system in the blueprint, this is what I need to do. And we're going to update our variables that we created. So we're going to set, and we drag off here, we can make the vector, connect these, and then do a similar thing for the orientation. We want to set this, make, and actually what we want to do here is there's Euler or quaternion to Euler function, and then we can do, yeah, make quaternion. And again, same thing, some of these need to be swapped. So what I need to do is invert these ones, and then send x and y here, 0 to w and z to z. We can connect our flow here. If you double click on one of these traces, it'll add in a little node so you can organize a little better. If this confused you, all I'm doing is changing units and compensating for the way I've set up this coordinate system here. If you're having trouble with that, you can add a print statement here and print these out while your sim is running and verify that these are updating how you'd expect. While we're talking about it, you can append strings together so you can print one long string instead of a bunch of these print statements. Just FYI. Okay, so now we have a function that takes in these parameters and formats them and updates our variables appropriately. So let's actually utilize this function. Let's go back to our default level. And we have this F16 variable. We'll get, and we can search for our function. And now all we need to do, since we handle the logic internally here, we can just connect these directly. And we should be done here. Compile, save the level blueprint. Now these are being passed in and updating our local variables here. So let's actually use those, and we'll come to the main event graph. And you can add some logic for the begin play. It doesn't really matter, or this one. We're just going to update with the tick. The functions we want are set actor location and set actor rotation. There we go. And this is going to be pretty simple. We just need to get these variables and pass them into these functions. Get add here. I'm going to add these together, and then I'm going to break this apart so that I can make this rotator type and connect these. If you just wanted to stay in quaternion, you could probably make, I wonder if there's a, yep, a quaternion to rotation here. So if you just wanted to pass the straight quaternion in, you could do that. The sole reason why I'm doing this is because let's say I didn't add that and I said that I wanted this to fly at a psi angle of 0, it would actually point the aircraft going east instead of north. So that's just a compensation there. You can also do is rotate the cesium. So you can come in here and rotate, the whole Earth to align with that. There's a couple different ways to get around that. This is just kind of the simplest way. And then we should just have to connect these. And I think that's it. Let's come back to our level. Let's start it. Our port succeeded. And now it's just waiting for a UDP connection. So if I start my simulator sending out UDP, our aircraft is now flying. And it's just in this trim solution right now. We haven't added controls yet. But that's the basics of it. Let me stop this. Depending on the quality of your UDP connection, this may not be as smooth. It might skip or look like it's lagging a little bit. You'll want to update your send rate on your physics side. Yeah, there's a couple things you can do if you're having that issue, but otherwise this should just work. Let's just look at the final blueprints. So for our level blueprint, we're telling how this level should operate. When we start by pressing the play button, it comes in and possesses our vehicle and sets up our UDP connection. And then every time step through, it's checking if there is data ready. And if there is, it pulls that, breaks it apart, sends it into this function in our F-16 blueprint. Here, we update units and sign conventions for the way we've modeled our aircraft. It updates these variables, and we use those variables to update the location and rotation of our vehicle here. So that's pretty much it. All we need to do now is we can set up a input controller. So Unreal, if we come into project settings in this input tab here, we can set up inputs. So you can set up the keyboard really easily, or a USB joystick, or a game controller like an Xbox controller. We'll look at that in a different video and set up the UDP send to send that to our physics. And we'll also look at packaging in that next video. While we're here, let's take a look at what you can do inside of Unreal. This is still a pretty relatively simple project I made for our research lab. This is actually a level in and of itself as a main menu where I can have the user put in the port, the IP address, where they want to start, and even change what aircraft they want to fly or maps. So Cesium, it needs the internet to load in the tiles. There's a way to download the tiles. That's a little complicated. We won't discuss that here. So when I start, I actually have this HUD overlay, and I have different camera views. I can cycle the HUD on and off. And if I start my sim, you can see the HUD updating. I also have landing gear, and if I had some kind of pilot controller, the control surfaces would move. This F-16 model is actually one you can purchase. I think it's around $25 to $30, and you get all the really nice textures and animations. So if that's something you want, you can look at purchasing on your own. Other than that, there's some really cool aircraft in the Epic Games store. If you look under Vigilante, I believe it is, there's a lot of free vehicles. So you can see there's this F-15 that comes with all the animations and retractable gear and all that, and it's free. So there isn't an F-16 one as I've seen, so that's unfortunate for our class, but for your final project or whatever, if you wanted to get one of these aircraft working, check out this store. There's a lot of cool assets in here, missiles and all sorts of cool things. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully it was helpful to see me walk through this in real time rather than just reading through that tutorial document. So we'll see in the next video where we'll be going over setting up a controller and the send UDP and then packaging this project into an executable. We'll see you then.